and the church wouldn't let them say a lot of the words that they needed to use, so they made up this fake language. And I thought that somewhere herein lives a story on how we can use the concept of Grammarlock to design better, more inclusive everything. Why not simplify? If a cartoon can get the message across to kids that don't possess the overcomplicated vernacular of their parents, why can't we design things in the same way? Anyway, without further ado, let's talk cartoons. So I'm going to start off by providing a little context into the language of Grammarlock, using 4 short clips of cartoons which get quite a bit of information across to the viewer without speaking any words. Well, at least not any words that belong to any known language, rather using the made-up words of Grammarlock. We'll start off with Pingu. Have a look at the short clip, and then I'll do a quick summary afterwards. So we started off with a little penguin. His name is Pingu, and he's ice fishing. He's helped by a seal who chucks him a fish, and by Pingu's exclamation, we can tell he's pretty pleased with the size of the fish, and he decides to reward the seal with some food and encouragement. We experience a couple of emotions here, just through the sounds that the characters are making, like surprise made by the seal when he pops out of the water with the fish, and excitement with Pingu sizing up his fish, and the gratitude from Pingu when he rewards the seal. So next up, we're going to have a short version of Angry Birds called Angry Bird 2. So the scene opens up with a bird serving 3 little birds food. They're making pretty unhappy sounds, showing that they're displeased in the food that they're being served. One little bird shows his frustration using an angry grunt, and he comes up with an idea, which he illustrates by making a little excited squeak. And then he shoots off the food off the island, making a very pleased with himself chuckle. Here we could experience the disgust of the 3 little birds in the food that they're being served, the frustration felt by the one little bird who can't seem to get his friends to just take the bowl for him, and pride when the same little bird has successfully gotten rid of the food. All of this was just illustrated to us using Grammarlock. Next, let's take a look at everyone's guilty pleasure on Ice Age, Scrat, who has always been able to make at least me love him without saying a word. So as per usual, we start off with Scrat trying to find a spot to store his precious acorn. He shows his frustration through his grunts when he's trying to hit the ground, and then his glee with happy squeaks. When something goes wrong, he makes a sound that we can pick up on as a fright. If we played the clip a little longer, we'd see that a huge crack forms in the ice, which is why he got the fright. And Scrat's patented screeches and pops have been understood by parents and children since the very first Ice Age. No one questioned his ability to speak. The message was clear enough, and we found it funny without a translator. And last but not least, we'll have a look at Courage from Courage the Cowardly Dog, able to tell us there's danger through his patented panicked blabbering. to have achieved through these clips is to illustrate what exactly Grammarly is as a language and how it manages to communicate feelings and emotions to an audience that has no idea of what the words actually mean. Now, how does this interesting made-up language tie up with design? I thought about how we already use the concept of Grammarly in design, as well as its potential in the future. I'm sure everyone watching this has some understanding or at least interest in design in general, and some of you may know quite a bit about the importance of sound in user experience. Some may not know much about the mechanics of sound design, but have almost definitely experienced it when using an app or even when just having left the fridge door open for too long. No matter where you fit on the spectrum, I'd like to perhaps encourage your imaginations in terms of looking at sound design from a different perspective, the perspective of a child watching cartoons. What do we generally think of when we think of words and sound? When we hear a word like bang, how do we think it should look? What shape should it have and what color do you see? Is it maybe something like this? Sharp lines, bold print, strong colors. What do you think this bang would maybe sound like? Perhaps something like this clip I found from the Looney Tunes. There's so many examples of onomatopoeia where words sound like the sound they make. But with Grammarly, we're looking at it through a slightly more abstract lens. The sound the word makes is rather what conveys the message. And in this case of Grammarly, that we're mixing backwards. We're not going word first, we're going image first. The word itself doesn't actually mean anything. Because Grammarly is very heavily based on visual communication that goes along with the sound that the characters are making, Grammarly approaches sound image first. Now, let me try to illustrate what I mean with this. Let's look at this green glob monster. If we're going image first, based on his image, what would he sound like? His bumpy, heavy-looking exterior, a bit globular in structure, perhaps a little like this. His speech patterns would maybe be a little slurred, as if his jaw is a little loose, and the words would be clumsy and fold into one another. And then how about this little guy? He's definitely cuter, perhaps less clumsy looking. He's got softer edges and no obvious bumpy growths. Maybe he'd sound a little like this. His speech patterns would maybe be a little quicker than his bulkier friends. He looks a lot younger too, and maybe squeakier and a bit more excitable. The connections we make with sound and emotion are used in design every day. They either tell us we're on the right track or that we're going the wrong way. We recognize sounds like this because they bring out a certain response in us. The way we react to these sounds all come down to something called psychoacoustics. Psychoacoustics is the scientific study of how humans perceive various sounds. It's the study of our physical responses when exposed to various sounds. There's quite a bit of detail involved in this, and I'd be happy to share the link to the video I watched of Susan Rogers, a professor of music production and engineering, explaining this study beautifully, but I'm just going to give you a quick summary of what she said. So basically within psychoacoustics, we have two concepts. One being consonants. These are harmonizing tones which are typically associated with sweetness, pleasantness, and acceptability. This is when two sounds played together at the same time sound pleasant. Then we have dissonance, which are tones that sound harsh or unpleasant when played at the same time, commonly associated with discomfort or instability. This helps to explain why when we see this little guy with his smooth lines and round appearance, we assume that he would make a sweet, pleasant sound. And this guy, with his rough-looking texture, might make a bit more of a gruff, messy noise. Now, Now that we understand a little bit more about how it works and why we react to certain sounds, why is it an integral part of good design? Using the right sounds in the right places can bring a whole new dynamic to the user experience. Think of sounds like Microsoft and EA Games. It doesn't take much for us to be able to imagine these sounds when the names of these companies are mentioned. There are many more examples of companies you can recognize by sound, like Sony PlayStation, and for me, Hirsch's Home Stores, thanks to all the Lucy Hirsch ads I heard on the radio. These sounds have been so well integrated into the experience that they have become part of the brand itself. All interactions and notifications can be improved using sound design. Sound design is able to improve the user's experience and communicate detail more quickly. Even a success notification is sometimes not as satisfying as being able to hear the fact that your car door has locked with a beep, rather than having to double check that the door is actually locked. Audio feedback complements visual feedback. Buttons that make pleasant little noises when clicked on are usually more fun to click. And if anyone here plays or has ever played a video game, have you ever tried to play it on mute? It's definitely not as engaging. Not to mention voice UX, which is one of my favorite topics, making everything more accessible to the differently abled. We have Amazon Alexa, who is my personal best friend. And then we have Google Home, and we have the new Apple HomePod, just to name a few. With voice UX on the rise, the future of sound design is a vast and open landscape for us to take hold of. I hope that you've been inspired by Grammarlot and that you're able to take it and create some fun, simple experiences that will change the way you use everything. Sorry, I have to mute myself to allow the presenters to talk. So.
Wow, thanks, Chiselle. That was fascinating. I'm sure there are questions, so people.
Sam, I think you're on mute.
Oh. Hello. Hi. I forgot to go onto the stage. Thanks, Chiselle. That was wow. My mind is blown. I think sound design. I haven't thought about it in this way, but yeah, you're right. It actually adds that level, that dimension that we take for granted. And for the differently abled, I think this is yeah, wow, what a game changer it would be if we always had this in mind when we're designing things. Questions, everyone. I think there's so much to unpack here, but if you have a question, I see Lars is on the speaker podium. So Lars, please go ahead with your question.
Well, thanks for the chat. Really interesting. So voice UX I find very exciting. Do you have any resources that would be a good starting point to look into that side of UX?
So voice UX in particular, I think I've got a bit of a lag on my side. Let me just make sure that my microphone...
Yeah, it's good now, yeah.
Okay, so voice UX in particular, I'd say pretty much there's quite a lot of stuff on Amazon's websites, and we've done quite a bit of research into the history of voice UX, which it was actually a talk that Snisha and I did together, which I'd be happy to share. In terms of voice UX working with sound design, I actually wasn't able to find a lot. A lot of it was on the science behind it. I'm happy to share that video link where that professor was, Professor Susan was actually discussing how we hear and why we respond to things in the way that we do. So I can share that link definitely, and I can also share the link to our previous talk on voice UX and the history of it and kind of where we see it going.
Cool. So how can you share that, Chiselle? Will you put it on listening.
I can just put it in the chat. Yeah, I'll put the
Okay.
link to it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. That will be awesome.
Sure.
You can also connect. I guess we can connect with Chiselle on LinkedIn. If you want to chat to her more about like voice UX, which she says is her passion. Chiselle introduced me to Alexa, which is also not my best friend, but I use her. I talk to her every day. Also a game changer. Any other questions? Pop it in the chat, or if you want to walk up to. Oh, Leo, great, go for it, Leo.
I think it was a very interesting talk. I have a statement then a question. So I've, funny enough, watched a video like 2 weeks back. It wasn't necessarily based on UX, but it was more on how scoring in movies actually affects the user's behavior as well. I'll find the link to that video, but I think it was really amazing just to understand like how using the same video but with different sounds can bring out different. So I'll share that in the chat once I do find it again. But also I just want to find out if you guys ever actually made use of like voice UX in apps that you've created, or have you come across it since working in the UX field, UX UI field, basically?
So we've integrated it in certain prototypes. I've definitely used it in prototypes, but I'm yet to get the dev buy-in where they're willing to dev the sound in for me. We're definitely able to sell it to the person who wants to use it as something that it definitely improves the experience for them. But tight deadlines and time generally doesn't. They put these kind of sounds on like the back end, like, okay, fine, if we're done with everything else, we'll do this. So I'm hoping that, but maybe talking a bit more about it, then we start to bring it a bit more to the forefront, and it's something that we rather think about as a necessity rather than a byproduct.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Leo. Anyone else want to walk up to the podium and broadcast a question? Liz, I see you moving around. We have another few minutes for questions. I see Lars has made a comment in the chat saying, I hear you, Chiselle, tech pushback is real, and in quotes, but is it worth the dev effort? Question. Speaks to the larger issue of tech buy-in to improve CX/UX. Yeah, I think we all can attest to that. Okay, Cody, you've got a question. Thanks.
So my question is, can we see this working, or voice UX working in web design? So I get and I see the value in app design on the user's device, but on web design, sound and web have never really gone well together in the past. Do you see that changing in the future, or do you see that working a little bit differently?
So I think in terms of web design, what happened was, so there's an aversion that sort of started with web, any sound in web, because what happened was people went too far with it, almost like they would, instead of holding back and simplifying and trying to make the experience easier and better, they were just trying to make like all the senses kind of bombarded. So like when you go onto a website where there is sound, generally it's like crazy music that it's unwelcome, you didn't want to hear it, instead of just the notification saying, yes, we've received your payment, like a little ting, just a success, like something to keep you moving forward and feel like you're engaged with the website. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but generally anything I've experienced, whenever there is sound on websites, everything makes a sound rather than just the things that need to. So if we can maybe start doing it a little bit cleaner, then we'll be able to use it a bit more often.
Thanks, yeah. Definitely agree with you there.
Thanks for that question, Cody. Yeah, I think sensory overload is also something we have to be mindful of, because there's just so much that our senses are having to take in. So it's a balance we need to strike, and it'll be interesting to see if, as designers, we can actually do that. Okay, Lars has asked, anyone remember Flash websites? Anyone?
Yeah.
MySpace, oh my goodness. Rest in peace, MySpace. So
Everything ringing and
yeah, it would be great to have more questions. We still have a couple more minutes with Chiselle before we have our next speaker on. But if not, thank you so much, Chiselle. That was very eye-opening and ear-opening.
Cool. Thanks so much for the opportunity and for listening.
Awesome. Last chance to ask questions.